B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, October 22nd, 2018. Winston Churchill famously said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." And these days, what we have to fear is the Distractor-in-chief and his Twitter machine. So as you know, there's another caravan of migrants displaced from Honduras who are moving northward through Mexico to our southern border. And Trump's all flipped out over it, and he is just panicking and spreading that fear to his loyal base of idiots. And he doesn't mind lying about what's going on. He said criminals and unknown Middle Easterners are mixed in with the caravan heading to the southern border of the United States. He has alerted the Border Patrol. I'm sorry. This is so ridiculous. It's a national emergency. That's what he wrote on Twitter. Must change laws, but first, let's exploit this a little more for the midterm elections. Because we know the Republicans are not serious about changing the immigration laws. They enjoy exploiting the misery of migrant families, including the children, because it makes their angry white base feel good about themselves. So there's no evidence that there are Middle Easterners there, and there's even less evidence that these are criminals. These are people who are leaving Honduras in part because of the failed policies of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Yes, early in the Obama years in 2009. We helped engineer a bloodless coup in Honduras, and we selected the replacement leader, who's imposed austerity and other U.S.-backed policies that have caused people to leave. The country is unlivable for many of those who are attempting to come to the United States. And Trump tells his rallies the truth. He's going to use the caravan and Kavanaugh as key issues to rally his base in the face of this dreaded blue wave of Democratic voters 15 days from now. We'll get to the Democrats in a bit. They're nervous too. But some facts first. There have not been any instances of attempted terrorism plots by people from Middle Eastern countries who illegally crossed the southern border. And there's only one example, and that's the guy who came in from Vancouver in 1999. He was kind of going to go to LAX and blow something up. And Trump continues to press his threat to stop providing foreign aid to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, which, of course, will not affect those who've already left. It will just make people more miserable and more likely to flee for the United States. Yeah, rational thinking. Not his strong suit. And when a New York Times female reporter, Emily Cochran, challenged Trump on the hardened criminals claim, Trump said, some of these people are hardened criminals, not good people. These are some bad people coming through. These aren't babies. These aren't little angels coming into our country. And when Cochran asked him what evidence he had for the hardened criminals, "Oh, please, don't be a baby, okay? Take a look, just take a look. Look at what's happening. Look at the Mexican soldiers that are laying on the ground." Well, in fact, Mexican soldiers fired tear gas, and 6 of them were injured as a result, I believe, of their own tear gas. So Trump makes this stuff up. And his base is primed and ready to believe it because they live in fear. They watch Fox News. And keep in mind that the Republicans discovered fear as a motivator for their voters after 9/11. And I have argued repeatedly that the airport security theater is where the fear is re-injected on the traveling public on a daily basis. And Trump thinks that by scaring the shit out of Republican voters, they'll show up, and in greater numbers than Democrats. Now, the turnout polls do favor Democrats, but you got to take into account the voter suppression. It works. And I fear the outcome in Georgia. where Stacey Abrams has registered a lot of new voters, and apparently those registrations are in a drawer because her opponent is the Secretary of State, and he's going to make sure that as many of those people as possible don't get to vote 15 days from now. The other distraction that Trump launched to actually reignite it, he reaches for transgender people to divide the American public, to sow division and discord. There's no other reason for the administration's reported effort to roll back the recognition and protection of transgender people by defining gender with the junk that you're born with. And nothing else matters. Now, I will admit that the issues of transgender persons make a lot of people uncomfortable, squeamish. They kind of go, ooh, I don't want to deal with that. And this is one of the things that comes out of the whole genre of reality TV. They take surveys and polls and find out what makes your skin crawl. Then they put it on TV and make you watch it, and you can't turn it off. And so I believe Trump has identified that for many Americans, not just his Twitter fans, the transgender issues make them distinctly uncomfortable. And so, just in time for the election, they offer this memo that gets floated. There already has been a protest at the White House today by LGBTQ persons. Over at Health and Human Services, they want to use this new definition that would define sex as either male or female, unchangeable, determined by the genitals you are born with. It would eradicate federal recognition of the estimated 1.4 million Americans who recognize themselves as a gender other than the one they were born with. And Chelsea Manning, who finally got some surgery over the weekend, she went on Twitter and said, laws don't determine our existence. We determine our existence. And in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there is an effort by conservatives. They qualified a ballot initiative that would repeal the state law that protects transgender people from discrimination, including the right to use restrooms that match their gender identity. So it's clear that polling shows that Republicans can benefit by targeting transgender people. And here in California, they don't try to do that. They went after the gas tax instead. But these are simply tactics that Republicans are content to use in order to try to game elections in their favor. And speaking of elections and immigrants, there is a new interview that I produced, released today at whowhatwhy.org, with the author of a new book called People Like Us. Her name is Sayu Bhojwani, and she used to run the mayor's office in New York that dealt with immigrants and immigration issues. And in her new book, she profiles dozens of people across the country who have found their way into elective office, and they are first-generation immigrants or second-generation Americans. And they are using district elections and local redistricting in order to find a way into public office. They're also using public financing in states like Arizona. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with author Sayu Bhojwani.
The idea of redistricting, when it is done by an independent commission of citizens rather than the people who are sitting in office, is redistricting does allow for representation by people of different backgrounds, of different political parties and different ethnicities, and often is an important process that comes out of the census years, right? And so a lot of the activity that we saw was post-census. I talk in the book particularly about single-member districts and redistricting in that regard. But I do think as we're moving into a census period and the period that's going to come after that, where we're going to see where populations have changed, I think the fight for independent redistricting commissions at the state level is an important one. And, fewer than half of the United States use redistricting commissions. So that means that more than half of the states have legislators who are drawing their own district.
That's author Sayu Bhojwani. You can hear the full interview today or anytime at whowhatwhy.org. Now we take a look at the shifting explanations offered by the Royal House of Saud about how Jamal Khashoggi was killed at their consulate in Istanbul. Friday, they finally admitted that they killed him. They said that a fight broke out, and in the altercation that ensued, it was just so sad he was killed. And these shifting explanations and the attempt to float a cover story that nobody is buying have left Donald Trump in a bit of a pickle because he said on, I think, Saturday that, oh, yeah, I accept the story from the Saudis. We're learning that one of the 15 members of the kill squad sent to Istanbul was used as a body double. They put Khashoggi's clothes on him, and he left the embassy in an attempt to fool people. Gosh, that was really effective. They're also telling us that the Khashoggi remains were rolled up in a rug given to a local collaborator of the Saudis to dispose of. And Erdogan, the dictator of Turkey these days, he's an autocrat at least, he is threatening to hold a news conference tomorrow where he will show the results of the Turkish investigation. How hard he goes on the Saudis remains to be seen. And the corporate media is using this opportunity to remind themselves, if not the American people, that Saudi Arabia is running a gruesome war in Yemen that has been off the front pages here and off our radar for months, if not years. And the Times put the story on the front page Sunday, 3 years into Saudi Arabia's invisible war. Well, it's only invisible because the U.S. media doesn't cover it. They figure Americans just don't care about Yemen. And our role in providing targeting information, resupplying the Saudis when they run out of bombs to drop. We have a sordid role in this ugly war. But our media keeps it out of sight. I believe the public television news hour ran a story about Yemen in the last couple of weeks for the first time in months. And in the corporate media, they don't even bother with anything outside our borders. Also on Sunday's Times front page, the headline reads, Saudis deploy a swarm of online trolls to stifle critics like Khashoggi. And it's true. They even planted a guy at Twitter here in San Francisco. And Twitter discovered it and fired him. But they don't bother to mention that Israel has a very sophisticated and well-funded operation that trolls people all around the world, including here in the United States, that the U.S. has a very sophisticated cyber warfare operation that includes many of the same tactics and techniques. But we're the good guys, and we always put white hats on ourselves when we report on ourselves. Moon of Alabama is a murky blogger. I believe he's based in Romania. We don't actually know who this person is. But I have been reviewing a post by Moon from October 14th. Settling the Khashoggi case is a difficult matter. And Moon properly notes the history of this. The Ottoman Empire ruled much of the Arab world. The neo-Ottoman wannabe Sultan Recep Tayyip Erdogan would like to regain that historic position for Turkey. His main competition, Saudi Arabia. They have much more money. They're strategically aligned with Israel and the United States, while Turkey under Erdogan is more or less isolated. But the maneuver earlier this year when the Saudis cut ties with Qatar, Turkey sent its military to prevent a Saudi invasion, and that gave him financial backing, several $100 million. And he needs U.S. support, Moon believes, to try to counter the influence of the Saudis in the region. And there's much more here that defines Jamal Khashoggi as, I think, in a much more accurate way. Let's see. He was a big supporter of the Arab Spring, in line with Hillary Clinton. Barack Obama supported a regime change program for most of the Middle East. After the fall of Mubarak in Egypt, the election win by the Brotherhood, the Saudi rulers feared that they would be the next in line. They started to finance counter-revolutions in Egypt and Bahrain and elsewhere. And this is where Khashoggi apparently parted ways. But he also writes that Khashoggi started a number of projects that reek of preparations for a CIA-controlled color revolution in Saudi Arabia. Now, maybe the deep state is scheming to do that. I can't imagine that it has the support of the current administration. So I've linked to the Moon of Alabama site. It's a little frustrating because I can't get you to this particular item. It's listed as October 14th if you want to try to scroll down and find it. But Moon doesn't provide distinct URLs for each post, and so it's a little frustrating when you dig in to try to find that particular post. Glenn Greenwald makes some very good observations in an article posted today at The Intercept. And he notes that in the wake of the Khashoggi murder, that the corporate media has been trotting out all kinds of experts. But they don't identify the true interests of many of these experts. So Greenwald zeroes in on David Rothkopf, a longtime member of the U.S. foreign policy elite, former editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy, a visiting scholar at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, professor at Columbia University, but he's also getting $50,000 a month to lobby for the United Arab Emirates. Oh, and I forgot on my little list here, he used to be the managing director of Kissinger Associates. Yes, that Kissinger. So now Rothkopf has signed an agreement to get $50,000 a month to consult the United Arab Emirates and its leadership on development of messages, media projects, outreach efforts. But when he appears on television or writes for CNN or the Washington Post, he is not identified as a paid agent of one of the strongest allies of Saudi Arabia. He's been on MSNBC, he's been on CNN, and in every case, they do not identify the actual paymaster of David Rothkopf these days. Also, I want to salute Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton over at Gray Zone. They expose how Vice News did paid propaganda for Saudi Arabia. They have a contract with the Saudi Research and Marketing Group, SRMG, described as a regime mouthpiece closely linked to the royal family. And they have produced videos that are gauzy and positive about Saudi Arabia and the reforms under Mohammed bin Salman. One of them, Vice published in March, promoting the King Abdulaziz Camel Festival, produced in partnership with the SRMG, and the video has had more than 5 million views. And Shane Smith, one of the co-founders of Vice News, now described as a billionaire, I don't know how he did it, he was hanging out with the Crown Prince when he visited the United States earlier this year. And it's also intriguing to note that another co-founder of Vice has been making news in a very different way in the last few days. Gavin McInnes left the company in a disagreement with the other co-founders, but he is now the leader of the Proud Boys, a white nationalist group that made news after they held a meeting in Manhattan that degenerated into a brawl on the streets after the event. Gavin McInnes, age 48, started the Proud Boys in 2016. He describes himself as a champion of Western values. Many of his statements have been racist and echoed white nationalist philosophies. So that's quite a soup that you got over there at Vice News. Today I'm releasing to my subscribers a fresh in-depth interview with writer Ian Berman. And I'll note that Ian is a longtime listener to this podcast and a subscriber and a man who I've gotten to know a little bit over the past few years. He wrote a 3-part series published at Mint Press News that argues that Zionists have turned accusations of anti-Semitism into what he calls a sword, weaponizing the claim and in turn trivializing it, while at the same time deploying it to silence critics like Jeremy Corbyn, who is the head of the Labour Party and thought to be a contender for Prime Minister in Britain. Here's an excerpt from my in-depth interview with Ian Berman.
I mentioned in the article at one point, as I was growing up, we always had this sense of that Jews just want to be accepted as citizens just like everybody else. And I sort of came on the tail end of that where, we kind of reached that sort of status, and there always will be, and there always has been some form of anti-Semitism, but in general in the U.S. gotten to a point where you may be Jewish, but you're not considered an other, so to speak. It seems like now that's taken for granted, such that now you don't have to worry about being singled out as Jewish just for the sake of you're Jewish. It can happen. There are certainly right-wing groups that do that, but for the most part, that's not commonly accepted. So now they've taken the step of saying, okay, well, I want to support Israel. And anybody who challenges that and who challenges the quote-unquote Jewish state, as Israel self-proclaims, is now making me uncomfortable as a Jew. So you can't do that. That's anti-Semitism. And that's where the problem lies. So now you're saying, okay, let's take a step back here. You're saying we can't criticize Israel because you're Jewish. We can't use our First Amendment rights because somehow Israel is more important to you than it may be to other people. And that somehow you feel that's an attack upon your heritage. I just don't buy that.
That's Ian Berman, and I invite listeners to grab the full podcast at peterbcollins.com, at iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, and Stitcher. And we cover a lot of ground related to the way Israel tracks down and silences those who are critical of the government and its policies, claiming that such criticism is anti-Semitic on its face. And all of my work here is made possible by great people who subscribe. People like Faith Peoples, who kicks in $20 a month. That's at least one of her subscriptions. I know she's got many. There's Benny Alto up in Oregon. He's got a subscription for each of his dogs. And Sandra Fish and Joe Carson, they each kick in $10 a month. I really appreciate these individuals, and I'd like to appreciate you as well. All you have to do is take out a subscription. You can drop by peterbcollins.com. There's a menu button. Pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page, and boom, you can choose a level of support that is comfortable for you and your budget. And if you are allergic to PayPal, you want to communicate with me via the U.S. mail, my address is Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Now, after I spoke with Ian Berman earlier today, I picked up this piece from Facebook, and Jonathan Ophir, who is an Israeli expatriate who is a musician. I think he works with an orchestra in Denmark or Sweden. I'm sorry, it's not clear to me in my memory. Anyway, he posted a lengthy piece here because the head of the Israeli human rights group, B'Tselem, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, it's B''Tselem. His name is Haggai El-Ad, and he gave a speech at the UN Security Council on Thursday, describing the intolerable existence day in and day out that Palestinians endure under occupation. He described how Israel is conducting a calculated and deliberate process of slowly splitting up an entire people, fragmenting their land, disrupting their lives. He explained how the Israeli-established planning regime in the West Bank is meant by design to serve settlers and dispossess Palestinians. He noted how the Supreme Court justices are complicit in Israel's war crimes by approving an action that is nothing short of a war crime, forcible transfer of protected people in an occupied territory. He referred to Gaza as an open-air prison, and much more. Now, this has produced a huge backlash. Prime Minister Netanyahu called it a disgrace, a speech full of lies. Reliable Zionist Danny Danon, who is now the ambassador to the United Nations from Israel, called it a circus and shouted at him in Hebrew that he was a collaborator and shame on you, interrupting him right in the middle of the speech. So I give credit to people like Ian Berman and Haggai El-Ad, Jews who are willing to stand up and stand for the principles of Judaism and the teachings in the Torah. But they are the distinct minority, and the demagogues are in control these days. Well, I knew something was up because yesterday, in the span of 1 hour, I got more than 15 emails from the campaign of Andrew Gillum, the Democrat who's running for governor of Florida. Now, I don't know how they got my email address, and sure, I could unsubscribe, but it's an interesting insight into a very active and aggressive campaign in Florida as they take on a Trump acolyte named Ron DeSantis. And DeSantis is the guy who is running TV ads where he holds up a Trump sign and extols the virtues of our comb-over president to his young children. And so when Jake Tapper asked DeSantis if he thought Trump is a good role model for children, well, DeSantis dumped on Gillum about U.S. policy toward Israel, which, of course, is hardly a part of the agenda of any governor of the state of Florida. But he responded by saying he thought Trump did the right thing by moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. And he said, I know Andrew didn't support that and doesn't think that's right. So Gillum looked at Jake Tapper and said, I'm confused by the question. The question, Tapper reiterated, was whether or not he thinks President Trump is a good role model for the children of Florida. Gillum said, well, that's what I thought. No, he's not. Trump is weak. He performs as all weak people do. They become bullies. And DeSantis is his acolyte. He's trying out to be the Trump apprentice. At every turn, he's tweeting him. So DeSantis dumped on Gillum, saying he wouldn't be able to work with Trump. And Gillum responded, this is not Russia. You shouldn't have to kiss the ring of the President of the United States for the President to see to the goodwill of the third largest state in all of America. This is a democracy. We can dissent. We can disagree. And where it comes to working together, we can do that too. If you want to look for an example, look at how Rick Scott, who's running for Senate as a Republican, and I worked with each other in the aftermath of this hurricane. Well, Nancy Pelosi appears to be getting the message. On Friday, she told an interviewer, I think it was for the LA Times, that at some point there's going to be a transition and she will hand over power. But she is expecting to be elected Speaker if the Democrats prevail and regain control of the House through the midterm elections, just over 2 weeks away. She says there has to be a transition at some point of all this. I am not going to make myself a lame duck. But she suggests she would serve at least through the 2020 elections. Now, this is a signal that 78-year-old Pelosi recognizes that she's not going to be there forever. And she is tipping her hand that because there are so many Democrats running who say they won't support her for Speaker, and they're doing that in order to get elected, that in order to save face, she may in fact lose the election for Speaker if the Democrats get a majority. The election would be held sometime in early December. So it'll be interesting to see. As you know, I have known Nancy Pelosi for a long time. I have a lot of respect for her, and I think that she should have stepped down 2 or 4 years ago. But it appears she is getting the message. You may have heard that there is a judge who served on the appeals court with Brett Kavanaugh in Washington, D.C., who sent a series of ethics complaints to the Supreme Court. That's the process that is available. Well, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has referred those ethics complaints against the newest junior justice to a good friend of both men. His name is Timkovich, and his first name is Timothy, I think. Yes, he's Tim Timkovich, and he is a staunch conservative, former Colorado Solicitor General, and he got help from Brett Kavanaugh back in 2003 when his nomination to the court was dragging out. So John Roberts has handed to Timkovich the file of ethics complaints. There's more than a dozen that were filed while Kavanaugh was still technically a circuit court judge. And one critic, Christine Lucius, who was an aide to Senator Patrick Leahy on the Judiciary Committee at that time, she says Roberts and Kavanaugh and Timkovich are all in the same professional circle. They're all tied to the Bush administration. These are all men who certainly knew each other and are now in powerful positions on the bench. And she said that instead of going out of his way to choose a judge who didn't have any ties to Kavanaugh, like somebody nominated by Clinton or Obama, Roberts has added to the perception that the Supreme Court justices consider themselves above the law. And finally today, I want to tip you to some fresh coverage of the Russiagate narrative. The Washington Post is saying that the leak-proof Mueller operation, people familiar with the special counsel probe are leaking to the Washington Post that Roger Stone, the longtime Trump advisor, and WikiLeaks remain under the scrutiny of the Mueller team. Now, this is interesting because the latest information relates to whether or not Stone was in touch with WikiLeaks at the time that they released information that critics say came from Russia, but we've never seen any evidence to establish that. Meanwhile, federal prosecutors not related to the Mueller team filed the first charges alleging 2018 interference by Russia. They fingered a Russian woman and are charging her with conspiracy to defraud the United States by sowing discord in the U.S. political system. And this just seems like so much more bullshit. The woman, Elena Alexeyevna Kuzhanova, was indicted on September 28th, but not unsealed until late on Friday. And she's charged with running an operation with a strategic goal to sow division and discord in the U.S. political system. And this is just so laughable, because certainly Russians might attempt to do this, but we do it so well on our own, by ourselves. And the extent to which they may be amplifying that is really hard to calculate or to measure in any significant way. But that doesn't stop Kathleen Hall Jamieson. She is over at the University of Pennsylvania. She's a professor of journalism. She runs the Annenberg, Annenberg Policy Center. Her new book is Cyber War: How Russian Hackers and Trolls Helped Elect a President. And she's firmly convinced. And I don't have time to go through her arguments here, but I don't buy it. For example, she claims by posting segments of speeches that Hillary Clinton delivered behind closed doors, that WikiLeaks and Assange shifted the media focus from Trump's proclivities and the reasons the Russians might be happy to see him win to an examination of the vulnerabilities of both major party nominees. She is saying here that Hillary Clinton's speeches, which Bernie Sanders made a big issue of, that they should have remained secret, and that their disclosure is what changed the election. She blames that on Russia, and therefore, boom, no further evidence needed. Caitlin Johnstone has a great piece at Consortium News today that's based on a report from Politico, suggesting that when Mueller wraps it up, we may not know what he found. The public shouldn't expect a comprehensive and presidency-wrecking account of Kremlin meddling and alleged obstruction of justice. It will be up to DOJ leaders to make the politically turbocharged decision of whether to make Mueller's report public. And Johnstone says this is by far the clearest indication yet that the Mueller investigation will end with Trump still in office and zero proof of collusion with the Russian government. She has much more to say, and I hope you'll read it. And finally, I've also linked to a recap from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting of the corporate media malfeasance related to Russiagate and the ongoing recaps that have been published just in time for the midterm election. It concludes the media's focus on Russiagate through the midterm elections has as much to do with its political utility as with the evidence. With Trump accusing China of midterm interference because they bought a 4-page ad segment in the Des Moines Register, both sides undermining trust in the democratic process does not augur well for the future of our system. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. We do run long on Mondays. There's a lot of news to catch up on. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling